Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Daily War Room update. Maurice Hirsch from Jerusalem, and I'm joined today with my colleague and friend Yoni Ben Menachem to discuss the latest developments in the war with Gaza and with the terrorists in Gaza. We are now on, I think it's day 53 of the event starting on the 7th of October, with the massacre of over 1,200 people and the kidnapping of 240 odd people by a group of terrorists, sundry groups of terrorists in the Gaza Strip, not only Hamas, but also by the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, an organization connected to Mahmoud Abbas's PLO, and also by the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, directly connected to Fatah, which is also headed by Mahmoud Abbas. And we're seeing this war ongoing now for an extended period of time. We are seeing, just in the last few days, a ceasefire, for want of a better word. In Hebrew, there's another word, it's called a Hauga, maybe a halt in the operations, rather than a ceasefire being a word to describe a relative stop in all activities, to then consider what will come next. That is not an accurate description of what was meant to be happening in the last few days. This halt, this hafuga, was meant to be there in place to allow, on the one hand, the release of up to 100 hostages of the people being held by Hamas, on the one hand, in return for Israel releasing some 300 terrorists from Israeli prisons, and for all types of other concessions, allowing more fuel, allowing more trucks into the Gaza Strip to ostensibly provide humanitarian aid to the population. And so what was meant to happen, according to the deal agreed on Wednesday night and then implemented starting on Friday, was that during the first 4 days of this halt, Israel was, the terrorists, Hamas, was meant to release every day 13 hostages, and then for the first 3 days, and then 11 on the last night, altogether 50. And in return, Israel would release 3 terrorists for every 1 hostage then released. So we had, over the first 4 days, 50 hostages being released, and some 150 terrorists being released from prison. There were a few additional hostages released by Hamas, specifically Thai nationals, in response to what appears to have been a threat from the Thai government that either the terrorists release their citizens or the Thai government will execute terrorists that they're holding in their prison. That seems to have been the key factor there. And so today we saw a few of these additional hostages being released and being visited by the deputy Thai prime minister, who was in Israel today. The rest of the deal is meant to be, or had the potential to be, that for every additional 10 hostages released by Hamas, by the terrorists, Israel would commit to another day of halt, getting to a potential maximum of 10 days, after which the Israeli government decided we will then return to all-out war. And the question that I'm going to discuss today with my friend Yoni, who really is an expert on Palestinian affairs and very up to date also on what's going on in the Gaza Strip. He'll discuss with us a little bit about what's been going on during these days of the halt, and really we'll discuss the question of, can Israel actually effectively go back to all-out war after the halt? We're not sure at the moment how long it's going to continue on. We're not sure at the exactly. We know that and understand that the terrorists will, from their side, try and draw out the halt for as long as possible in order to garner possibly international consensus that this halt should actually become a ceasefire, and the ceasefire should become an end to the hostilities. Hamas's goal obviously being to survive another day, to continue on ruling the Gaza Strip, controlling whatever it does, and to regain control after Israel pulls out of the Gaza Strip, and then using this period of both hostilities and its leverage to free terrorists as a way to garner more support within Palestinian society for the day after Mahmoud Abbas, for the continuing relations. As we the JCPA reported just a few days ago, some 75% of Palestinians support the October 7 massacre. Levels of 80 and 90% support the terrorist organizations, while only 20% express their support for the Palestinian Authority. So this is a part of the strategy of the terrorists: use violence as a means to leverage Israel on the one hand to extract any type of bonus or advantage that can be gained on the one hand, and on the other hand also to bolster its position within Palestinian society, forever optimistic about the fact that they will survive for another day, another week, another month, another year, and will continue to be an active and dominant force, even if not the most dominant force within Palestinian society. So that's where we are at the moment. What we've seen just in the last really few hours leading up to this broadcast is probably one of the biggest tests that Israel will face during this halt, with a coordinated, what the IDF spokesman has reported as a coordinated Hamas attack on IDF forces, exploding a number of IEDs and attacking IDF soldiers, causing a number of what is being described at the moment as light injuries. And so how will Israel respond to this? At the same time, we have reports that Israel's head of the Mossad, the intelligence agency for special missions, is in Qatar together with the head of the CIA, discussing how to possibly extend the halt for a longer period, and to bring about the release of more terrorists. In with all of that, of those different and conflicting moves, Hamas is also expressing its as if it has a choice, its unsatisfaction or lack of satisfaction with the terrorist prisoners that Israel is considering to release. There has been some criticism from the Palestinian side of some of it even being said on by the prisoners themselves who were released, that they were in any way or in any case going to be released in the next few months. So what was the point in releasing them early? That's a question that's discussed. So within that wider spectrum, Yoni, give us an idea of what's actually going on in the Gaza Strip and during these days of the halt. To what extent is life for the Gazans going back to almost a daily routine, as much as that's possible? The reports of not a small amount of Gazans trying to make their way back up to the north of the Gaza Strip, and really breach the lines of the IDF. With all of that, over to you, Yoni. Just give us an update and a picture of what's going on.
So as we see, the halt or the pause or the ceasefire, whatever you called it, was used by Hamas terrorists in Gaza to regroup and trying to reorganize their forces, equipping with more weapons, collecting food, collecting fuel. Everything goes down to the tunnel to be kept there. And even according to some reports, they are preparing for a counterattack on the IDF forces as soon as the halt is officially expired. And this is a very alarming sign. As we saw in the last few hours, they already started to violate the halt or the pause, and they attacked the IDF soldiers in north of Gaza with three explosive, with three side bombs and shooting. And as a result, some Israeli fighters, IDF fighters, were injured, slightly injured. We don't know if the Israeli army responded. There are conflicting reports about what is going on right now, but the chief of staff, General Herzi Halevi, is supposed to make a special announcement in the coming hour, in the coming minutes. So we'll have to wait and see what he says and whether the IDF will retaliate. Hamas used the halt in the fighting to encourage the residents of the north of Gaza Strip to try and return to their houses. Actually, most of these houses are demolished, but he tried to persuade them to go back to the north of Gaza in order to show that he still controls the Gaza Strip, still the rule of Hamas is effective. And indeed, there were a few attempts of groups of Gazans trying to go back to north of Gaza to their homes. The IDF distribute leaflets warning all the residents of Gaza not to try and get to the north of Gaza because this is a closed military area and there's danger for their life. But there were a few attempts encouraged by Hamas. The IDF had to open fire towards these groups, which were probably also among them were Hamas terrorists, and there are a few injuries. But as a whole, until now, the IDF succeeded in preventing any attempt of Hamas to bring back residents or terrorists disguised as residents to the north of Gaza. So this shows that the IDF still controls very well the north of Gaza. But you know, this incident of these explosives that Hamas used today against the IDF soldiers and the shooting, this is a warning sign to what is expected to happen on the field if the IDF does not continue fighting, because the IDF soldiers cannot sit there like ducks in a fire range and just be a target for attacks of Hamas. So this hold cannot last for a long time. I think that the Israeli IDF commanders understand that very well, but I hope that they will convey this message to the political echelon. What is the significance of such a thing? Tonight is a meeting of the Security Cabinet, and I'm sure that this thing will be reported to the ministers, and we'll see what kind of decisions they will take. I personally hope that Israel will retaliate on this attack on the Israeli soldiers, because if it doesn't retaliate, then this is affecting the deterrence of the Israeli army. So we'll have to wait and see what will happen in the coming hour, and also listen to the statement of the Chief of Staff, General Halevi. In any case, like you mentioned, there are on the political echelon, there are attempts to try and negotiate for a broader ceasefire or broader halt or whatever you call it, or a pause in the fighting. The head of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea, he flew to Doha in Qatar, where he will be meeting with the head of the CIA, William Burns, and also with the Prime Minister of Qatar, Mohammed Al Thani, to discuss idea to have a broader halt, at least for the 10 days, the period of the 10 days. And there are different reports on some suggestion of Qatar or Hamas that Hamas will release not only men, but also soldiers, women and men, soldiers of the IDF that are being in captivity in all, and also, of course, the criteria will change for the release of the Palestinian terrorists held by Israel. So they're trying to negotiate something like that, according to the reports. We'll have to see, wait and see if it really works and works out. But this is something very dangerous, in my opinion. Hamas is trying to achieve a long ceasefire in the war, using different tricks in order to gain time and stay in power in Gaza. So, in my opinion, if Israel agrees to that, this is like giving a reward to Hamas, to terrorism, a reward for the horrible massacre that the terrorists of Hamas committed in the settlements, in the Jewish communities near the Gaza border on the 7th of October. And such a thing will only strengthen Hamas and prevent Israel from achieving the goals of the war. Any negotiation with Hamas must be conducted under fire, under Israeli fire of the IDF, like the Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant promised a few days ago. He promised the soldiers he was visiting in Gaza Strip that if the negotiations with Hamas will resume, it will be under fire, so that they cannot dictate their condition to Israel. If we go back to October the 7th, there was a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas on the border of Gaza Strip, and Hamas violated this ceasefire and launched an attack on Israel, an attack that was planned for a long time, between 1 year to 2 years. So we see that they don't respect the ceasefire. And in any case, what happened today, just a while ago, indicates and stresses again that they are using the ceasefire to attack Israeli soldiers. So this is something that is violated very easily by Hamas, and Israel cannot trust Hamas.
So here, Yoni, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
We've seen in the last few days in Israel the pictures that have really been flooding the media of the hostages returning, babies, women, and we know that there are still many hostages, somewhere in the region of another 100, and at the moment another 180, 190 hostages still being held in Gaza. We understand that Hamas will try and really extend out this halt, this pause, for as long as possible, trading on the bodies of the hostages. So on the one hand, we've seen this almost euphoria in Israeli society of the hostages coming home, and rightly so, mothers, children, and being united with their families. And but on the other hand, also, this is something which is holding back the Israeli forces. And whilst we've all, I think, been witness to not small levels of rhetoric in the past about the destiny of Hamas, at the end of the day, Hamas has always survived to live another day, to govern another day, and to carry on with its terror. Do you think that the situation now is different? Do you think that at some stage Israel's government will say, we are obviously fearful for the lives of the hostages and the remaining hostages, and even if Hamas is continuing to string us along by the nose, saying that they will release another few hostages, do you think that time will come when the Israeli government will say it's enough is enough, and we are now returning to active war operations? As you said, the situation this afternoon where we have a direct breach of the halt, an attack initiated by Hamas, but at the same time, negotiations going on about the next 2 days and extending the halt and more hostages being released. Which of those two, I think, fundamentals of Israel's government's goals will win out. Two fundamentals being A, bring about the release of the hostages, B, defeat Hamas. Whilst the hostages are still there, how do you think the government will decide?
Well, I personally think that it's obvious that the Israeli government was blackmailed by Hamas. They used this sensitive point of the Israeli hostages to blackmail Israel. And if you remember at the beginning, the political echelon made it very clear that there are two goals for the war in Gaza. One is to free the Israeli abductees, the hostages. The other one is to topple the Hamas regime and destroy the military infrastructure. And then we saw that Israel gave priority to the first goal, which is releasing as many hostages as possible. And this is being used now by Hamas to try and blackmail more concessions from Israel. I'm very worried that there will be an erosion in the positions of the ministers in the security cabinet, because there was a consensus in the beginning that there is no other way but to topple the Hamas regime, because we cannot allow this situation to continue when the terrorist organization, which is worse than ISIS, which is worse than the Nazis, will keep controlling Gaza Strip and will be a constant threat to Israel. And also we have to take into consideration that the residents who lived in the Jewish communities near the Gazan borders, they don't want to go back to their houses before they feel safe again, and before Hamas is not around anymore in Gaza Strip, that can endanger the safety of the Jewish communities once more. So, what is needed is very clear. Israel cannot go back, cannot give up its demand to topple the Hamas regime and destroy its military infrastructure. This is something that has to be achieved as soon as possible. On the other hand, as we know, there are the hostages. There is the hostage issue, but I think that eventually Israel will have to make a very crucial decision in the coming days, and it will have to renew the fighting in Gaza, because the IDF cannot stand there just like not doing anything and be a target for Hamas attacks. And also we have to achieve the greater goal, which is destroying Hamas completely in Gaza Strip, because this is a lot of ramifications on the security situation in Israel in the future. You have to remember that Hamas is not only threatening the residents of the Jewish communities on the border with Gaza, but also they have rockets, they have drones, they have military capabilities to threaten also major cities in Israel. So this is something that have to be dealt with very soon, and I think the cabinet will have to make very crucial decisions in the coming days.
So really what you're saying, Yoni, is that the balance of power, maybe the stress that needs to be given to both destroying Hamas and as a result ensuring the security of the communities that lived prior to the 7th of October on that border with Hamas, and really ensuring Israel's survival in that whole southern area is dependent on Israel returning to fight, which I think is a clear understanding, and I would hope that it's also the understanding of the cabinet. My fear is just for as long as
if the cabinet will not take this decision, as I recommend, this will be interpreted by Hamas as weakness, and they will see an open window to try and blackmail Israel for more concessions. And if you remember, Israel, the political echelon, both the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense, said very clearly that exerting the military power, using power on the battlefield only helps to put pressure on Hamas to release more hostages. So we have to go back to this policy and renew the fighting and try to finish the job in the north of Gaza. There are a few pockets of resistance there of Hamas. Get it over with and continue to the center of Gaza Strip and to the south, to the area of Khan Yunis and Rafah, where are the real strongholds of Hamas, where the military wing of Hamas, the leadership of this military wing is hiding in the tunnels, where more of the hostages are kept in the tunnels there in the south of Gaza. And this will put more pressure on Hamas. And if they want to negotiate, then they should negotiate with Israel under fire when Israel continues the war and put the pressure on them.
So one of the things that we saw yesterday, Yoni, was the fact that the hostages in last night's release were actually released in Gaza City. The perception that Gaza City is entirely destroyed, I think, is proved to be a little bit inaccurate. And really, we saw entire areas, entire buildings from which the terrorists came out. Do you think that's an indication that again a reaffirmation of what we know, that there are still tunnels connecting northern Gaza with southern Gaza, and that really the terrorists still have their ability to move freely using those tunnels all the time? So where exactly are we standing also with the idea of conquering the whole entire northern area of Gaza and all of the neighborhoods of Gaza City?
Well, you made a good point, but we have to explain that what we saw in the prisoner release was one of the pockets that I was talking about, pockets of resistance that the Israeli army didn't finish the job there yet, so there was still control of Hamas. This is where they released the Israeli hostages. So they're trying to create, this is psychological war, they're trying to create an image that are still controlling Gaza City. So this is why they did that in that area. But actually, the IDF fully controls most of the Gaza City, aside from small pockets near Shajaiya area and a few little pockets around that area. This is where they release the Israeli hostages. As for what you mentioned about the tunnels, I think that you are right. I think the tunnels are the big surprise of this war. And I think this is one of the failures of the Israeli intelligence and the Israeli army, that they were not aware of the extent of this tunnel web and the enormous tunnel web all over Gaza City, which is like 500 kilometers under the ground, which was built during a few years with money from Qatar and by cement and iron that was brought into Gaza in order to rehabilitate Gaza from the wars, the rounds of fighting that were happening during the years, but most of it went to build the tunnels under the Israeli radar, the Israeli intelligence radar. So this is something that has to be checked after the war. How did this happen? In any case, they are using this tunnel web very efficiently, and the IDF has a big challenge in front of it when it will renew the fighting, and this is to overcome this enormous web of tunnels going from north to south of Gaza Strip, where the terrorists can even move vehicles inside the tunnels. So just imagine how big are these tunnels and how difficult it is to fight Hamas, thousands of terrorists who are hiding in these tunnels, and they're coming out only to attack Israeli soldiers. So this is a big challenge for the Israeli army.
I think you're right on the front of the tunnels, Yoni. I think that it's one of the additional points that will have to be discussed regarding Israel's intelligence, what exactly we knew, how much we knew. I think the extent of the tunnels under Gaza is very much a mystery to us. I saw recently a document which was originally classified as top secret, but that came out already in December 2016, in which already there they described that Hamas had 450 to 500 kilometers of tunnels. Obviously, since then, another 5 years have gone on. So I really do wonder what the entire extent of the tunnel system is, on the one hand. On the other hand, we've also seen reports coming from the IDF describing the fact that they've already destroyed some 150 to 170 tunnels, sometimes using very creative capabilities. We had a few days ago, I think last week, Thursday, we had Brigadier General in the reserves, Amir Avivi, describing exactly that process of uncovering and then dealing with the tunnels, and then at the same time the incident in which Moshe Leitner was and three other IDF officers were killed. Moshe, the son of the JCPA's previous CEO of Yechiel Leiter, being killed going into one of these booby-trapped tunnels. I think that has to be also the assumption going forward when the IDF does renew its fighting. Obviously, in the last few days, we've heard discussion of the IDF learning from the experiences of the last few weeks and improving its operational capabilities. I think we also have to assume that Hamas, and not underestimate our enemies to any state, that Hamas has conducted a similar process of learning the capabilities, the operational activities of the IDF, and has prepared for that next stage in the fighting, and has further booby-trapped some of these tunnels, or has enhanced the booby traps in some of them to provide an answer almost to the IDF activities until now. When the IDF does renew, let's assume that the IDF does resume its all-out offensive, how do you think that Hamas will respond? What will they do with the terror, with the hostages? What will the next stage be with also the use and abuse of the civilian population? What are we going to see the next stages of this really vicious Hamas war developing into? Do you think that we're going to see pictures of hostages being, God forbid, obviously, as they've already promised, executed on live television? Where do you think Hamas is going to its next step?
Before I answer that, you mentioned our colleague Yechiel Leiter, whose hero son Moshe was killed in the war in Gaza. I saw today a video of Caroline Glick interviewing Yechiel Leiter, and he said that in the interview that the Prime Minister Netanyahu, who called him and also visited him to comfort him for the loss of his son, promised him that he will destroy Hamas. This was a personal promise of Prime Minister Netanyahu to Yechiel Leiter, and I hope and I'm sure that Netanyahu will fulfill this promise. This is very important. As for your question, It depends on the extent of the military power that the IDF will use when it goes back to war again against Hamas. From what I hear from the military, from my military sources, the renewed attacks will be a lot stronger than what we saw until now. So this is an encouraging sign. Of course, Hamas is a cruel terror organization, more cruel than ISIS. And of course, there's also always a possibility that they will try to execute some of the Israeli hostages, soldiers, in order to deter Israel from continuing the military attack on their strongholds. This is a possibility that we have to take into consideration. On the other hand, they also understand that these are bargaining chips in their hands, and that they can use them as human shields. So I don't know what will happen, what they decide, but all the options should be taken into consideration. And also we have to remember that there are tunnels that are connecting between Gaza Strip and Egypt. These tunnels are in the south of Gaza Strip on the Philadelphia corridor, on the border between Egypt and Gaza Strip. So I think that the IDF should take control of this area immediately on the Philadelphia corridors in order to prevent the possibility of a Hamas leader escaping through the tunnels to Egypt, taking with them some Israeli hostages as human shields. This is something very important that had to be done as soon as the war renew, because we have to block the possibility that Hamas terrorists will try to escape and go to Sinai and join there the ranks of ISIS with some Israeli hostages. We don't know. The game is open. All options are possible, and I'm sure that the Israeli army is taking into consideration all these options.
You're exactly right with the tunnels going from Egypt into Gaza and obviously vice versa. I think one of the more stark admissions that we saw from the IDF already towards the beginning of the fighting was that it was clear that the Hamas terrorists and the Gazan terrorists had used munitions which could only have been smuggled into Gaza via Egypt and via that tunnel system. So I think it's clear that that tunnel system does exist. I would assume, since Egypt isn't a democratic country, that the Egyptian authorities know about those tunnels. There were previously, in previous years, in 2013, Egypt had really tried to cut down on the number of tunnels, and there were reports that in 2013 Egypt closed some 1,300, or I think 1,900 even, tunnels going from Gaza into Egypt. But that in 2018 that whole tunnel system, or very much of it, was renewed on condition the right payment was made to the Egyptian authorities by Hamas. So I think that tunnel system does exist. I think that obviously it would be an imperative to close off and that whole Philadelphia corridor, that whole border with Egypt, in order to somehow prevent the escape of the terrorists. But I fear that would be something which would then lock all of the Gazans into the area of the Gaza Strip and deny them that possibility to seek refuge in Egypt. I think one of the bigger travesties of this war, or really one of the bigger realities that have come out of this war, is the indifference, to use a gentle word, probably more accurately, almost the hatred that has been expressed by many parts of the international community, definitely the Arab countries, towards the Palestinians in Gaza, denying them any type of refuge. Jordan, Egypt, all of these countries that talk in high terms of the Arab Brotherhood and their support for the Palestinians, have been unwilling to accept even a minor number of refugees from the Gaza Strip, and so that, I think, is an expression of their hatred, their despise, their indifference, to the Gazan people, and then on the international front, where you have countries like Canada. I hope that I'm not overstepping my bounds here. Canada has an active policy to actively incentivize paying money to people to move to Canada, and yet we haven't seen any of these other countries, including Canada, offering a site of refuge for the Gazans. I think Scotland and the Scottish the Minister for Scotland being the only place that said that they would be willing to take refugees, but then nothing coming of that. So we're seeing, if Israel was to then cut off that southern border with Egypt, whilst it does have its operational, obviously, advantages, it would also lend itself to possibly more attacks on Israel, that we're denying the Palestinians the ability to run away. How do you think that do you see any chance that the Arab countries, Jordan, Egypt, would actively stop Gazans running through the tunnels and running into Egypt? Do you think that if Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was faced with, I don't know, with Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, and the other Gazan Hamas terrorist leaders popping up in a tunnel in Egypt, what do you think they would do?
I think they will allow them to go into Egypt, and they will not even arrest them. They will not put them into custody. Because you have to understand, before 2017, Hamas in Gaza Strip was collaborating with the ISIS branch in the north of Sinai, and together they were committing terror attacks against the Egyptian army. The most famous terror attack is the assassination of the Egyptian general prosecutor Hisham Barakat, which was committed by a joint operation of Hamas and ISIS. After Yahya Sinwar in 2017, he was elected in the internal elections of Hamas as the leader of Hamas. There was a rapprochement between Hamas leadership in Gaza and between the Egyptian intelligence, and they made peace, and there was a deal that the Egyptian will open permanently the Rafah passage for the Gazans, citizens, that they can move into Egypt, travel abroad through the Rafah crossing. And in return, there was a commitment by Yahya Sinwar to stop the military cooperation between Hamas and ISIS in Sinai and stop attacks on Egyptian targets. And Yahya Sinwar respected this agreement, and from that day and until now, there are no joint terror attacks of Hamas and ISIS against the Egyptian targets. So Egypt is trying to keep good relations with Hamas. That means with Yahya Sinwar, with Mohammed Deif, and the other leaders of the military wing. There is even an interesting report that I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Mohammed Deif, he went to Egypt through one of the tunnels under the Philadelphia corridor in order to have a medical treatment. And the Egyptians did not arrest him. On the contrary, they helped him get this medical treatment, and he went back. After the medical treatment, he went back to Gaza. So I don't think that they will arrest them or prevent them from escaping into Egypt.
That's I think quite a damning assessment, Yoni. I think it shows the level of, I don't know, on the one hand, in possibly open support for for Hamas from a country that we ostensibly have a peace agreement with if they wouldn't even act to arrest them,
this is
considering their activities.
You have to understand, Maurice, that the most important thing for President Sisi is the national security interest of Egypt. And he doesn't want to start a fight with Hamas and turn them back into enemies who commit terror attacks in Egypt in collaboration with ISIS. So I don't think that he will prevent them. I don't think he will arrest them. If they want to seek refuge in Egypt, he will allow them to do so in order to keep the good relationship between Egypt and Hamas.
But that would appear to be an expression, Yoni, of Egyptian skepticism about the commitment of Israel to really destroy Hamas. Because if Hamas is going to be destroyed by Israel, then there's no reason why Sisi shouldn't arrest any Hamas leader and even extradite them to Israel that manages to escape into Egypt. But only if he sees that Israel's intentions aren't to the full extent to destroy Hamas, then he would have possibly an incentive to carry on. I think our discussion...
You're definitely right. You're definitely right. This is why it's so important that the IDF will resume fire and continue the fighting against Hamas to give an incentive to Egypt also to act against Hamas.
Absolute resolve in this war and against Hamas until its destruction is, I think, definitely the order of the day. I think we could probably carry on discussing these subjects, Yoni, for many hours into the night, but unfortunately our time has run out. And so I thank you for joining us, and to all our viewers, thank you all for joining us too. And we will see you again tomorrow afternoon at 4 in the afternoon, 4 p.m. Israel time. Until then, keep safe. Thank you very much, and we pray also for both for the return of the hostages and at the same time for for our leaders to be imbued with the resolve to finish the work and to destroy all of the terrorist organizations in the Gaza Strip and in our area in general. Stay safe, everyone.